welcome everyone, and for anyone who I haven't met yet, my name is Joel Towers. I'm the president of the New School. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to this panel on mitigating climate risks, focusing on the question of whether carbon-based wealth tax is a solution. There's a long history of climate talks here at SEPA, funded by the Tyson Foundation, that have mostly taken place in person, but we have decided to expand this webinar format in order to be able to reach a larger audience around the world. And so we're very happy to have done that for today. As I said, the panel will focus on two important challenges: climate risks and wealth distribution. Those will be the main themes. I will be joining the panel later to speak to some of the issues as they relate here to the New School. From my own perspective, it will be an interesting panel for me to join, speaking as an architect and someone who has worked in climate for over 30 years, but not on the economic side of it. So I may be the oddball out in the panel discussion, but my comments will hopefully be relevant to this discussion. The questions of wealth distribution, of course, and climate risk are critical to work being done here by scholars at the New School, as well as topics that will be put forward by the Brazilian government at the next G20 and COP30, which will be happening in Brazil. And so I wanted to thank everyone involved in putting this event together, including Jose Bastos, the Brazilian finance minister, who is also a former PhD in economics from the NSSR. So we're welcoming back alumni as well to this event. I will hand it off to Professor Willi Semmler, my friend and colleague, to introduce the panel a bit more.
Yes, thank you very much for your nice introduction. And originally, Teresa Gilarducci, the head of the SEPA, wanted to be here also, but she cannot be here. And so we are happy to have Joel giving a nice introduction now. And I want to say, well, roughly the sequence of the events that we want to have here. So we will first start with the, Unurjargal Nyambuu is the co-author of our book. We will discuss or present a little bit discussion of our book that will be done by Karim Irwaki. And then Unra will share this part. And we all have to stick to 15 minutes, and we have some delay already. Then after this, we will start the panel discussion with a major introduction of can carbon-based wealth tax be a solution to the climate problem and to the unfair, let's say, wealth distribution as well. So this is a topic that it has two goals, so to speak, in this discussion there. And I will introduce then later also the specific speakers there, Jose and also the other speakers with the topic and make some remarks. But let us start first with the book review by Karim, and Audra will share this part.
Okay.
You want to share this part?
Okay, hi everybody.
Of the CUNY system, and she's a co-author of this book, and she is well equipped to introduce Karim as well as making remarks about the book. Okay, Onra.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Unurjargal Nyambuu, associate professor at CUNY, and co-author of the book Sustainable Macroeconomics, Climate Risks and Energy Transitions. I would like to introduce Dr. Karim Irwaki, who published comprehensive reviews of our book. The Dr. Karim Irwaki serves as the ambassador and the special envoy of the International Human Rights Council to the European Union. He's an honorary professor of international finance and geopolitics at Malaga University. He also received the Nelson Mandela International Peace Prize in 2024.
Okay,
you.
Karim, you can start. Can you upload your files? You have them?
Should I start?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. Again, it's night for me here in Spain, in Malaga. But then good afternoon, everyone, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. It is with profound respect and heartfelt gratitude that I stand before this esteemed gathering at the New School webinar, my alma mater, to address such a distinguished group of scholars and leaders in the fields of sustainable macroeconomics, climate risk, and energy transition. I am truly honored to have the opportunity to express my deepest thanks for your unwavering commitment to advance sustainable macroeconomics and addressing issue of climate change. I would like to extend my sincere congratulations to the president of the New School, Professor Joel Towers, on his recent appointment. I am confident that his leadership will take this prestigious institution to new heights, and I look forward to the continued success and impact of the New School under his guidance. So it was a pleasure meeting him virtually. I saw him at various occasions, but I never had the pleasure in meeting him physically. A special thank you goes to my dear professor, friend, and colleague, Professor Willi Semmler, whose kind invitation to attend this virtual conference means a great deal to me. I would like also to express my appreciation to the director of SIPA, Professor Teresa Ghilarducci, and all the staff and researchers whose dedication made this event possible. As I stand here today, I am reminded of a deeply personal memory that has shaped my intellectual journey. I was a PhD student in the New School from 1984 to 1990, a period that was both intellectually challenging and profoundly transformative. During these formative years, I had the profound privilege of undertaking my doctoral thesis under the mentorship of Professor Edward Nell, a guiding light, who became both a father figure and a cherished friend. With his inspiring guidance, I successfully completed my PhD at the New School for Social Research with the honor of having Professor Willi Semmler serve on my defense committee alongside other distinguished scholars like Unurjargal, Willi Semmler, and Leontiev, as an achievement that represented a defining moment in my academic journey. This collaboration extended beyond the thesis itself, culminating in the co-authorship of a seminal book that Professor Nell, milestone enriched by the extraordinary honor of having Nobel laureate Lawrence Klein pen the preface of our work. I would like to pay also special tribute to the mentors who guided me during my time at the New School and whose intellectual legacy continued to inspire me. The late Nobel laureate, Professor Leontiev, Nobel laureate, Professor Robert Mundell, the late Nobel laureate, Professor Lawrence Klein, the late Professor Robert Hellbrunner, Professor Willi Semmler, Anwar Sheikh, Professor Duncan Foley, among others. Their contribution to the intellectual history of the New School are indelible, and I am deeply grateful for their influence on my academic development. So the central theme of my talk is exploring the complex challenges of climate change, climate risk, and the transition to low-carbon economy through the insightful perspective of Professor Nyambuu and Semmler. In the light of the industrial world's deep-rooted reliance on fossil fuels and the urgent need to stay within the planet's carbon budgets, the book Sustainable Macroeconomics, Climate Risk and Energy Transition, Dynamic Modeling, Empirics and Policies, authored by both authors, explore the intricate challenges of climate change and climate risk and shifting toward a low-carbon economy. This important work builds on the fundamental idea presented in the Oxford Handbook of Macroeconomics and Global Warming published in 2015, Oxford University Press, by Lucas Berner and Willi Semmler. The Nyambuu and Semmler's book provide an in-depth exploration of the interplay between macroeconomic stability, climate risks, and energy transition, offering both theoretical and model-guided as well as empirical analysis of this complex issue. In the context of dynamic macroeconomics, the authors argue for a transformative shift toward sustainable macroeconomics. They also address key issues such as market behavior that exacerbates environmental degradation, the impact of carbon-intensive resource use, and obstacle like short-termism and infrastructural locks-in that impede progress. Now, before delving into the details, it is essential to first set the context and reflect on the global insights on climate change offered by former Director General of UNESCO, Professor Federico Mayor Saragossa, a prominent scientist, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who's also a scientist, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, and Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz, who also share the Nobel Prize in Peace for his climate change contribution. Furthermore, it is important to highlight how the contribution of Professor Nyambuu and Semmler's book represents a significant advancement in translating this global perspective into actionable solutions. Reflecting on global perspective, insight from Federico Mayor, Antonio Guterres, Jeffrey Sachs, and Joseph Stiglitz. In reflecting on the perspective of global leaders such as these prominent figures, it is evident that addressing the intersection of climate change and macroeconomics is both urgent and essential. The reflection of global leaders mentioned above converge on the urgent need to address the climate crisis through integrated economic and environmental policies. Their insights offer a multidimensional framework for tackling climate change, emphasizing ethical imperative, systematic transformation, and sustainable development. In his opus magnum book, The World Ahead, published in 1999 by UNESCO, Federico Mayor offers a profound and insightful perspective on the critical climate challenges of our time. His analysis provides a roadmap for addressing climate change with a focus on ethical responsibility, global cooperation, and sustainable development. His call to action is clear. Government, institution, and individual must embrace a holistic approach that combines immediate and transformative measures to address the climate crisis. By aligning climate action with the principle of justice and cooperation, Federico Mayor envisions a future where environmental sustainability and human well-being are not only achievable, but mutually reinforcing goals. Allow me to highlight here that the urgent call for climate action articulated by United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, the innovative policy approach championed by Jeffrey Sachs, and the macroeconomic perspective advanced by Joseph Stiglitz converge in a powerful synthesis within navigating the climate macroeconomic nexus. Each of these leading figures contributes critical dimensions to understanding and addressing the complex interplay between climate change and economic policy. Federico Mayor, with his extensive background in sustainable development, emphasizes the need for immediate climate action, particularly from industrial nations. His focus on social justice highlights the disproportionate impact of climate change on vulnerable population. In his work, he advocates for international cooperation and systemic changes to achieve both environmental sustainability and economic development, and underscoring the role of education and public engagement in driving climate action. Federico Mayor emphasized the urgent need for immediate action to confront the escalating climate crisis. He argues the window for effective intervention is rapidly closing, and delays will only intensify the repercussions. Central to his argument is the principle of historical responsibility. Industrialized nations, which have contributed disproportionately to greenhouse gas emission, must lead the way in mitigating climate impact and supporting global effort to curb further damage. Antonio Guterres, with his deep understanding of climate science, calls for a comprehensive transformation of global economic system to integrate environmental consideration. His leadership has been instrumental in advocating global climate agreements and emphasizes the need for a systemic shift toward sustainability in economic policies. Guterres has adeptly combined his scientific knowledge with his political insight to tackle the multifaceted challenges of climate change. His comprehensive understanding of fundamental issues rooted in his scientific training has been pivotal in advancing global climate initiative. Guterres' leadership is distinguished by his certificated grasp of the interaction between science and policy, showcasing his commitment to integrating scientific principles into effective climate strategies. His advocacy for global cooperation and innovative solutions highlights his exceptional capacity to merge scientific understanding with political leadership in the pursuit of sustainable development. The vision of embedding environmental concern into economic decision-making reflects the core principle in the book by Professor Nyambuu and Semmler. Their dynamic macroeconomic framework align with Guterres' call advocating for the integration of climate risk into economic strategies to foster long-term resilience and sustainability. Jeffrey Sachs advocates for integrating economic development with environmental stewardship. He highlights the importance of innovative policies that move beyond traditional economic models to address the complex challenges of climate change. His work aligns with the need for global cooperation and integrated policy solutions for transitioning to low-carbon economy. Such contribution extend far beyond theoretical discourse. His emphasis on implementing practical solutions and his focus on actionable strategy have shaped significant global initiative aimed at transitioning to low-carbon economy. His advocacy for global cooperation and integrated policy measures emphasizes the importance of cohesive strategy that unite economic and environmental objective. The book of Semmler and Young reflects this principle by offering a comprehensive analysis of the necessity shift towards sustainable macroeconomics framework. It aligns with Sachs' vision of a holistic approach, combining empirical research with practical policy recommendations to address both environmental sustainability and economic growth. Through this alignment, Sachs' work enriches the book's contribution, reinforcing the need for innovative and collaborative strategies to confront the climate crisis. His enduring impact on the field serves as a testament to his commitment to advancing sustainability development and fostering global resilience. I want just to open a comment very fast. Sachs, as a prominent economist and advocate for sustainability development, has extensively discussed the need for innovative fiscal measures to climate change and promote environmental sustainability. However, he has not explicitly proposed a carbon wealth tax in the specific terms commonly associated with the concept. It's very important to mention. I will come back later on. While Sachs is a leading voice in climate and economic policy, his proposals focus more on carbon taxes and global financing mechanism, example given green bonds and development aid for sustainable projects, rather than a specific tax on carbon-related wealth. The concept of a carbon wealth tax aligns with his principle, but does not appear in his published policy proposal as a distinctive initiative. Very important to mention this.
Professor Erwaki, 2 more minutes, please. 2 more minutes left. Thank you.
Stiglitz, a research advocate for policies that balance short-term ecological needs and enduring economic stability. His call for a comprehensive approach in economic and climate consideration is reflected in his emphasis on the importance of embedding climate risk into economic planning. His approach challenges conventional economic thought and pushes for a paradigm shift toward models that are better equipped to handle the global climates. Now, just to the major innovation in the book, transcend traditional market-oriented as well as growth theory framework, advocating for the integration of climate change and risk and macroeconomics. The authors offer model-based and empirical relevant solution-oriented insight rather than alarmist prediction. To conclude, it is very important to say that the Advancing Sustainable Macroeconomics in the Age of Climate Change stands out as a seminal work offering profound insights into the integration of sustainable practice into macroeconomic framework. Nyambuu and Semmler's comprehensive analysis underscore the need for continued research and collaborative effort to address climate risk. Their work is pivotal in shaping economic policy that effectively tackle the environmental challenges of our time, making it a critical resource for understanding and navigating the complex dynamics of climate change and sustainable development. In conclusion, the path for decarbonization will undoubtedly be challenging as energy transition accelerates. Critical question of fairness will emerge, particularly around who will shoulder the cost of decarbonization key sectors such as building, transportation, agriculture, and manufacture. While some of these issues are addressed in Chapter 10, they also set the stage for deeper exploration. This provides an excellent segue into the next step, the panel discussion on clean energy workforce transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your nice summary of the book and laying out, so to speak, the bigger dimension of the current modeling of climate change and climate change policies. One of the issues is one can easily set up model-guided proposals, so to speak, for climate policies with market mechanism and carbon tax, or with fiscal and monetary policy, or with technology shifts toward renewable energy. The question is, however, how this can be implemented, or will be this implemented? Is this realistic to be implemented? So then we were thinking about one specific issues where these implementation often get stuck. That is namely some of the measures have very strong distributional effects. So disposable income of households, low income, middle income households will fall if you impose a carbon tax, which a carbon tax is basically a consumption tax. And there you get some uprising, you get some populist resistance, and we all know that, for example, governments in Germany are just failed because of some very populist uprising, the same in France. So we were thinking one has to combine this problem with income, wealth distribution, and social justice with the proposal that we have for moving forward with decarbonization of the economy, which is a huge undertaking with a lot of resistance, because one is locked in old procedures and old lifestyles and old energy production systems. So we were thinking that this is then probably a solution of dual problem, namely mitigating and controlling climate change and climate risk, and wealth distribution. So a lot of these discussions recently came up in international meetings on the disparity in wealth distributions. And so we're trying what the Germans would say, killing two birds with one stone, so to speak, having a better climate control and having a better wealth distribution control. You see, this is a preliminary now proposal. We have published this in more technical papers. We have published this now also. It's a CEPA, it's a paper that summarizes basically the main approach. And so this is the main attempt, so to speak, of this additional panel discussion now. And let me introduce now the panelists step by step. So it's Jose Bastos Neves, who is working with the Brazilian government. He is well, a mixture of a theorist coming from the New School, but also an important policymaker now in Brazil. He is in charge of the sustainable finance activities. he wants to bring together macroeconomic and ecological aspects in Brazil. He is also was involved in designing electronic trading systems for the electronic way to control carbon emission. And so he is now thrown into the middle of the politics, whereas in Brazil also, where Brazil is trying to raise a voice for the wealth distribution disparities in the international meetings, and at the same time also pushing this climate change, climate risk issue further. So the next speaker will be Joel Towers. He was very welcome him very much here that he can join our discussion. Of course, he was part of many meetings and many climate events that we had at the New School funded by the Thyssen Foundation. But now as a new president, he knows probably what, so to speak, universities are basically the creator and diffusion of knowledge, so to speak. And one of his, several of his remarks in recent times pointed to the problems and the topic, well, we have to pay attention more to climate change and climate risk, also with university projects and knowledge creation. So I think we will hear from him, and then we will next have Michael Kuhn and also Stefan Wracek. They work together. They are coming from the YASA. YASA is a huge research tank that works for the UN and international organizations for the global sustainability goals. And there are more than 50 nations on board, including the Russians and the Chinese. So, it's a very productive research team by professionals of all kinds of areas. And Michael is heading the economic frontier groups at the YASA. And he is also very did very lot of research in COVID and the impact on health system. And so he will talk about they call it natural capital, but actually what's behind this is now a new wave of research is taking into account basically nature and biodiversity. And there was recently conferences, and this is in a special areas where the two from the YASA are working on. And the issue is there, so should we view this nature and biodiversity as a global public good that has to be protected by legislature and by restrictions and so on, or is it an asset? Is it a worldwide asset that could be owned privately and sold and bought privately or on markets? And what will protect this, so to speak, natural capital more or better? So to speak, this was the original question that came up. And they have a very sophisticated solution mechanism now and models on this. And the last one will be Hans-Helmut Potz, who is a Harvard professor or a visitor at Harvard. He was in the German Bundesbank as the head of the survey of the German credit system and financial system. So he's really coming from finance, and he will tell you if our proposal will work or will not work, or what pitfalls are there. And this is important to get these critical remarks too, because we are just at the beginning with this proposal, and so these critical remarks are very important. His talk will be the facility of the carbon wealth tax, the feasibility, of the carbon wealth tax. So is it feasible, or are there pitfalls? And I think now these papers are now in already available, the technical paper at the also more popular papers that we summarize this result. But I think it's important to come to this discussion now and to evaluation, and it will not be the last discussion on this. So, okay, so let's start with the presentation by Jose on the proposal, and then we go to the president, Joel Towers, and then to Michael Kuhn and Hans-Helmut Kotz. And if possible, everybody 15 minutes. Yeah? Jose,
Yeah, sure. Let me just
slide.
upload my slide here. I'm having a problem uploading the presentation.
I've just made you a co-host. Do you see share
okay.
at the bottom, Jose?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, now
Okay.
can you all see?
Good. Yes.
Yeah. And as I change slides, can you see this too? Or no?
Yeah,
Yes.
very well.
Yes,
Very
We can
well.
see.
Okay. So sorry about that. Let me start by thanking Professor Willi Semmler, who was my advisor at the new school, and also SIPA and the new school as well for putting this event, for organizing this event. I'm really thrilled to be talking here about this theme, which was the subject of one of the chapters of my dissertation. And it's really exciting to be here again and having this opportunity. So thank you very much. As Willi already mentioned, I'll be talking about this proposal that we had, the carbon-based wealth tax. And to talk about this, I'm going to divide my presentation in 4 parts. The first one, I'm going to give some broad macro context. I am aware that in this audience, maybe this would be really simple for you, but it's always good to have at least the big picture in our minds. I think this helps to understand where this idea came from in the first place. Secondly, I'm going to also present some other wealth taxation discussions that has been going on, especially in the G20 context and in this climate in these climate discussions. In the third part, I'm going to talk more precisely about our proposal. So I'll also approach the identification problem, which is going to be more clearer in in the presentation, and I'm going to show some results of the simulations we did. And finally, I'm going to talk about some prospects of this idea going forward. So basically, this is the presentation's roadmap. So talking a little about the macro context, and I think this helps to explain why there are so many not really identical ideas, but ideas that come that delves into more or less the same kind of questions. On the one hand, we know that corporate taxation has been trending downwards since at least 2000, the year 2000. Right, this has happened across the board in the OECD countries. If I remember well, the number was around 35% or so in more or less the year 2000. Now, the general taxation on corporations is around 14 to 15%. More recently, and again, in these climate discussions, we see that a lot of initiatives have been built on this idea of giving green energy tax credits for enterprises. So IRA was based on this. China has a long tradition of subsidizing its industrial policy, and nowadays there is a great part of greening this industrial policy going on there. So as a result, taxation has been declining. This has consequences not only for the fiscal space of governments, but also for inequality. And on the other hand, especially after the pandemic, spending increased handsomely around the globe. But of course, the majority of spending came from the developed countries. But this is the weird side of it. The harder consequences has been felt in the developing and the least developed countries. So in Brazil, for instance, we have a really limited fiscal space. We cannot do any type of new policy because of our fiscal constraints, and it's even worse in least developed countries, many in Africa and also Asia, for instance, Sri Lanka 2 years ago. There is an overspread problem of debt, of government debt. And that's, I think, these are the two basic reasons why everybody started to look at increasing taxation to back up the increased spending solutions, right? So, and this is certainly true in Brazil. The government of Lula has this straightforward agenda of raising revenues, because we have to, one, increase spending, and two, we have to shut the fiscal deficit that we had 4 to 5 years ago. And in this context, we also, and this was Willi and me, we were talking about this, but of course it's a more general diagnosis. The problem with carbon pricing as a solution to raise revenues is that it's really regressive in distributional terms, right? Because it's basically a consumption tax, and this passes through the entire economy, leading to inflation and other problems that down the road will have to be tamed by, for instance, monetary policy. So we were thinking about a way of circumventing this distributional problem of carbon pricing. There are others that have been thinking about wealth taxation. Here, I want to focus, given my time restriction, on the work of Zuckman. He has released a technical report earlier this year, and that was commissioned by Brazil's presidency of the G20, and it ended up to appearing in the final report, the final communiqué that the 20 richest economies agreed on. So this is, in international political terms, was really surprising and was a really great news, I think, for our progressive economists. But basically what he's proposing is to set up a 2% taxation on billionaires. According to his calculations, nowadays is around 0.3%. And additionally, setting the minimum tax on multinationals, which is 15% now, to 20%. These two measures would raise $25 billion of revenues. He doesn't mention any specific destination to these resources, apart from this generic climate finance and poverty, cash transfers, etc. And importantly, he mentioned two implementation features that his proposal has to have in order to overcome some problems. The first one, he mentions an anti-exile tax, which means the more the capital stays in the country, the less it pays. So there is a premium of staying in the same residency. And also he mentioned the ability of some countries to collect this tax on foreign billionaires unilaterally. So this basically is the two strategies that he has to overcome the problem of capital flight in face of higher taxation. There are other initiatives. Really quickly here, there is the Global Solidarity Levies Task Force, which is come from the French government. They propose levies on international shipping, aviation, and fossil fuels. There are also some movements around implementing an integration of the different carbon markets that we have in the world. This will require a common CBAM, for instance, for the countries that are inside the system. IMF estimates say that this could raise up to $1.54 trillion. So just to give you a broad idea that there are a lot of discussion around these topics in the international fora. But then moving to our proposal here, right? So the carbon wealth tax appears in the discussion paper that I have with Professor Semmler. So basically, the idea is to tax the brown wealth, so the carbon-intensive capital that we have across all the economies, especially in the developed countries. Specifically, we would tax the yield of such assets and not the asset stock or the wealth itself. And this basically because of two things. First of all, wealth taxation is really, there are a lot of loopholes in it. And one of them I just mentioned, which is the capital flight, but there are others that I can talk more about this. But the second reason is that if you put taxation that is high enough in the capital gains, this can be shown to be equivalent as taxing the whole stock of wealth. And which is simpler, all the economies already do this. And so this was an easier path to go. We consider a levy from around 20 to 40% on capital income. Again, it has to be really high to have the same economic results as a wealth tax. So this is why it's so high, the taxation we were considering. And in terms of the use of revenues, we could use it for the Global South or the subsidized green investment. And we can think here about grants or collaterals for borrowing, the risking green investments. There are a lot of ways we could use extra finance in the
3 minutes.
Climate. Yeah.
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay. All right. So this is the simulation results. Here we did a portfolio optimization model. We simulated for 40 periods, and we kept track of the changes in the total wealth of this portfolio. We see that when we put a 40% tax and subsidies, we have the path is higher, which means that the portfolio is actually shifting towards green assets. And that means, of course, more resources to decarbonization. So the wealth path is actually better when we have this economy where you have to incentivize green assets. But of course, the main problem or the main question that we faced during our studies in this proposal is how to differentiate brown and green assets, right? So this is a really key question to make. We, at least 2 years ago, there were some movements towards the carbon disclosure of different companies and industries. There is a SEC regulation in the US that came out, I believe, last year, that was introducing these requirements for publicly listed companies. Taxonomy in Europe also has similar requirements. And of course, because we have experience in ETSs, we know more or less which sectors are the most polluting ones, right? So it's oil fields, mining, pulp and paper, glass, cement, and energy. So even if you don't have the exact numbers, we have a broad idea of who's polluting and who's polluting what is actually a brown capital. My final slide here about the prospects. We acknowledge and admittedly see the carbon wealth taxation is not yet a comprehensive solution. For instance, we were thinking basically about publicly listed companies that have to disclose their CO2 emissions, right? But what about the others? Of course, wealth is overspread in the economies. There are enterprises that are not open are not publicly listed. What do we do about them? Tax avoidance through capital flights is another problem that Zuckman already faced. We could draw some inspiration in his work. And also there is a negative incentive to disclose. So if you tax the companies that disclose their emissions, and you tax heavily, as I just said, there is a strong incentive for them to disclose or do not disclose or to tamper with the numbers. So this is another area that we have to investigate more what to do. But of course, amendments and continuous work can overcome these issues. I believe this is a work in progress. And again, I think it builds on a political momentum, which is the most crucial thing to have, right? For these new ideas that we had in the academia. And definitely the political momentum is really good. So as I just said, the final statement in the G20 explicitly mentioned taxation on super rich. This was the first time ever something like this appeared in the multilateral document. There has been the minimum taxation of 15% of multinationals that was championed by the Biden's presidency 2 years ago. And now we have COP30 in Brazil next year, which could be a great forum to put this together. All right, and that's it. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward for the discussion.
Thank you very much. Good presentation in terms of the substance, what we wanted to do. For us, there are papers now, you can read more details there. And the last contributor then will critically evaluate much more our concrete proposal, Professor Kotz. But we have the meantime, President Joel Towers, who wants to present a bit the university, somewhat vision on the climate change and climate risk. And I know he's a very competent person on this. He has been working on this for years, and he has a very influential position now to get things going. So, Joel, your turn.
Well, thank you, Willi. And I think I may be in the diminishing number of presidents who still focus on climate change in our world. And so, though we won't get too much into that, or perhaps we will later in the discussion, I wanted to offer a few thoughts, as you suggested, on universities in general, the New School in particular, and to try to tie it to the substance both of the new publication and of today's discussion. And so I will focus on a particular part of the facilities and operation of universities. But before I do, I think that it should go without saying, although it's important probably to reiterate it nonetheless, that universities play a central role and can play a central role in democratic and social transformation. And it is astonishing to me, as someone who's worked in climate change for as long as I have, that climate change still feels very much to me to be not centered in university consideration. It is a space of research for certain, and it is increasingly finding its way into the curriculum. But to suggest that a university which is charged with both the education of generations of students and the support of research that will have impact for decades into the future is not considering across the entirety of its disciplinary areas, the impact that climate change will have seems to me to be incredibly short-sighted. Climate change will impact everything that we do. And so understanding not just the economics of climate change or the biophysical conditions of climate change, but the ways in which it impacts psychology and philosophy and sociology and the disciplines in the arts and design and storytelling in the sort of engine of democracy space. Climate change is altering all of that. And so it needs to be a kind of field condition, in my opinion, in universities. And that is something that we've been working toward at the New School, and I'm particularly excited to be focusing on in my presidency. Of course, there are key areas of research that have been long focused on this at the New School, SEPA being one of those, and Willi has been leading that along with many of his colleagues. Other research centers like the Tishman Environment Design Center or the Urban Systems Lab here at the New School do pretty profound work in this space across climate, environmental justice, urban systems, and climate change. Many of us have participated, and this is something that I'll focus on here for a few seconds, in the New York City panel on climate change, the NPCC, which is a kind of a little sister to the IPCC. It's a local law established assessment report that has been in existence as part of local law since 2012 and as part of city policy from 2008. And for the past 5 years, I have been co-chairing the New York City panel on climate change. And it is a body that is responsible for providing the city with all of its projections of record so that all New York City policy takes into account critical climate risks, and by law they must. And so, for example, as we just finished the most recent report, and when we provide the city with projections on sea level rise, all buildings that will be impacted or infrastructure or parklands that will be impacted by sea level rise need to take into account the projections from the NPCC over the useful lifespan of those properties. And so it's a very it's a critical part of the city's capacity to manage both the adaptation and mitigation challenges of climate change. And we will continue the tradition of being co-chair of that, and that my colleague Timon McPherson will be taking on the co-chair's position now that I have stepped out of it to be president of the New School. But the thing that I wanted to focus on here at the university, beyond the curricular work and the research that we're doing, is the ways in which institutions of some scale, like a university like the New School, we have, for example, about 1.5 million square feet of real estate that we either own or operate, a roughly 15,000 person population between our students, faculty, and staff. That puts us in the sort of mid-range of universities here in the city, but we have the ability to have significant impact through, for example, our own decarbonization strategies. We have been participating as a peak load management site in New York City for many years, meaning that as energy demand intensifies during heating or cooling season, we can absorb some of that demand through the ways in which we adapt our building temperatures and operations in those moments. It's also a source of revenue for the university. So, for example, in the last year, through demand response, the university will realize almost $250,000 in revenue to the university. But the thing that's probably closest, though it's perhaps maybe a little tangential, but closest to the conversation today on carbon wealth tax, is New York City's Local Law 97. Local Law 97 is a mandate in New York City to reduce all buildings over a certain size, to reduce their carbon output, their operational carbon output, and it phases into effect over the course of the next 25 years, roughly. And so by 2030, the goal is to reduce building emissions by 40%, by 2050 at 80%. And it is a significant driver of change. It's a kind of tax on operation. And so if you don't upgrade your building facilities and operations, you are taxed by the city for the cost of the carbon that you continue to emit. New York, the New School, having been very interested in decarbonization and energy operation and efficiency for some time, is well positioned in this first phase. The law went into effect in 2024, and in this first 5-year period, we will not have any Local Law 97 costs associated with it. However, if we don't do further improvements to our building stock, by 2030, the New School will see over $500,000 a year in taxation for our carbon, 540,000 to be exact. The 5-year period after that, again, if we don't make improvements, we would be up to 740,000 a year and close to $1 million a year by 2040. So the New School is looking at a $16 million cost for 1.5 million square feet if we do not address our carbon, operational carbon output. So that's shall we say, it focuses the mind of senior administration at the university. That $16 million may seem small in the kinds of focus of this global challenge that we face, but for an institution, it's actually quite a significant incentive to be addressing these issues. The one other contribution, and I'm going to be careful on time, that I'd like to add to the conversation, and I really enjoyed reading the chapter on carbon-based wealth tax, is perhaps a question for discussion following, which is that much of the work seems to me to still be focused on operational carbon. Meaning the efficiency of assets or wealth how one measures. This was your question of identification, Jose, right? The identification problem. We are very focused on efficiency and operational carbon as the measure. Local Law 97 is completely focused on emissions through operations. It doesn't account for embodied carbon. And given the fact that one of the biggest challenges we face is the time to reduce carbon emissions, there is a kind of perverse incentive to reduce operational carbon by heavily investing in embodied carbon, and thereby increasing overall carbon emissions in the short term. And so I'm curious how the wealth tax might address that challenge, and so that perhaps I can leave that as a question for conversation after the presentations. But it's certainly something that I have been encouraging the City of New York to consider through the Office of Management and Budget in what are called the New York City Climate Resiliency Design Guidelines. So the guidelines are one of the tools that emerges from the New York City Panel on Climate Change that helps to frame all public projects for New York City, and to try to get OMB to be doing the work to identify the costs of embodied carbon in addition to the operational. So there's a lot more I could say from the perspective of what we do at the university, but I think this is perhaps the most relevant to the conversation that we're having today. And so I'll leave it there and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much. So this was a short and brief and very distinct contribution. That is, we will probably pick it up later, and we go first around with the other presentation, and then we have a second round of responses. Maybe Jose may think about this, or I can say something about the question, but that will come after the next round. So the next speaker is then Michael, who was said he's director of the Economic Frontier Program at the IASA, a huge research institution with modeling and also implementation of certain policies with a large number of experts. And Michael is the director of units there that want to somewhat bring in a little bit more economics in these large research organization. And he has running a team there of people which are very competent in new innovative ideas. In particular, they are focusing on natural capital or nature and biodiversity as a big question there. Next, that's coming after probably or beside the climate risk problem. And Michael, yeah, you have your slides up. You could start. Okay.
Great. Yes. Well, thank you ever so much, Willi, for inviting us to this prominent forum, and congratulations, actually, from my side to you and Unar for this terrific book. Also, a huge pleasure, actually, to have a forum at the New School. And without wanting to start the discussion straight away, just having heard Joel's talk, actually, I found it very interesting to hear about the sort of urban aspects of climate change, as this is actually on our new Director General's agenda. That is John Schellnhuber, and he's stated several times that he's very much interested in the transformation of the built environment. So actually, maybe this could be a starting point for a conversation. Now, let me turn to the topic at hand, which is, well, the good, the bad, and not the ugly, but nature. And it's trying to build a bridge a little bit from Willi's and Jose's thinking about kind of the climate, the macro climate context to the other big global problem, which is biodiversity and the erosion of natural capital. Well, the erosion of biodiversity and natural capital. So these are just very preliminary thoughts. It's definitely not a proposal as well developed as Jose's and Willi's, but I thought it is a very nice opportunity to maybe bounce around some ideas on this. I can be very brief here because we've already heard all the praise about Unar's and Willi's book. Let me just point out again, because I had the pleasure of reading it up front to provide a blurb. Goes without saying that no long-run macroeconomic analysis these days can go without a proper accounting of environmental and ultimately economic sustainability. And what is important is that actually the macroeconomic analysis really takes care of the fact that in the presence of sustainability problems, we typically have what is not a perfect economy as expressed by the first and second theorem of welfare. Externalities themselves, but also if we look at relevant markets, energy markets in particular, they're typically due to subject to imperfect competition, network platform effects, whatever. The nice thing in Unar's and Willi's book, and let me state that very explicitly, is they are taking due account of these issues, at least in some, and actually quite a large number of their chapters, which I found very, very nice. Now, that said, one may wonder whether some of the thinking they developed there can actually also be applied to issues surrounding natural capital and biodiversity. And they have been raised, of course, very prominently in the Dasgupta report. But I suppose Dasgupta's report is just a starting point, so further thinking needs to develop here. Which brings me to the sort of tentative topic, and I'm not really talking about wealth taxes and natural capital, but just to make the connection, looking at the literature, actually there's a very long-standing literature on taxation of natural resources. I've just put up a citation from Handbook of Public Economics, has a whole chapter devoted to this, written in 1985, so some time ago by now. What this literature tells us is a lot about the taxation of, if you wish, specific resources, like you have an oil well or you have a mine deposit, mineral deposit. You may also have like a fishery, and it kind of asks mainly from a public economic perspective, well, how should you tax to best extract resource rents if these are dynamic, if the resource can be developed and all the rest of it. What our approach, and this is going actually beyond the taxation question, which has only come up in a discussion which we had with Willi. Our approach is really to have a broader take on the nexus between natural capital as perhaps a public type of capital, and open for that matter, or it could be also financialized. That's the point Willi was raising very early on. And the nexus between these different types of natural capital and economic, which is kind of like traded capital. And of course, you can see various linkages of these types of capital. So they could go through production flows. But there's also externalities, so enhancing certain type of capital, economic capital, which is causing pollution, may actually harm your natural capital. And importantly, it's also relating to risk structures. And the question is, how do you value, especially the traded capital, and how should you value it when from a social perspective, really taking proper account of all the kind of aspects, and how would this social value of a certain type of capital actually differ from the private evaluation? And then you may already think about using some sort of taxes, and that could be wealth taxes, to correct for possible distortions. Let me give you an example just to illustrate this. And we, in our work, we actually haven't gone much beyond this example, but I hope it kind of carries the point. So let's think about three types of assets or capital. We have an agricultural, a traded asset, and you may think about what is good and bad and nature in here. So we have an agricultural asset, and agricultural production kind of based on that asset is relying on additional inputs, namely, say, fertilizer or pesticides. Again, they're produced with some capital in a firm, which, again, it's traded capital. Think of Bayer, Monsanto, whatever. But they also use pollinators, bees and other insects, a natural asset. And for the sake of today's talk, let's assume that's actually a public asset. It's non-traded, but it's being used in that particular agricultural production. And the problem is, while fertilizer is actually good, it's also bad for kind of agricultural production. It's also bad because it reduces the prevalence of the pollinators. And it may get as bad if you have various risks, for instance, the risk of droughts and other impacts on the ecosystem. It may actually lead to the possibility of even a long-term collapse of the pollinators. There's actually, talking about risks, there's another risk, which is the policy risk faced by the producer of fertilizer. And these risks, interestingly, are actually translated into the value of the agricultural asset. So that's what I mean with this trying to understand this whole nexus. Suppose a collapse happens, then the question is, well, how do you substitute your pollinators? One thing one could think of to make the story even more complicated, there's somewhere in the background, even nowadays, some biotech company developing artificial pollinators. it's actually in the current state not really on the market and not being used as a product. But of course, that asset has value. That activity has value in that it may actually replace the pollinator. So that's the sort of story we think of. We haven't fully modeled this yet. But let me just point out, we have a model in which we could calculate, with all these flows and risks, could calculate the values of such assets. And maybe let me start with the value of natural capital. So suppose someone is trying to develop this, and there's a lot of work going on which says, okay, look, we have all this natural capital, we need to financialize it in order to give it some value, then people care about it and they invest in it. And of course, there's the sort of ecosystem services value to pollinators and kind of firms, beekeeping firms are even actually already using it, right? Now, this value is kind of reduced through current damage, but it's also reduced to under the risk of a stock collapse, yeah, as maybe caused by the pollinators. Now, there's a paradox on the one hand, we are encouraging people to invest in natural capital. On the other hand, research is going on that tries to identify the risks of this natural capital. So once these risks are understood, actually, this may well be a disincentive to invest in there. Is that the right solution? No, it is not, because we need to jump to the value of the pesticide capital. And that has, again, its productive value, which will be taken into account by investors. There may be a discount due to policy risk. Again, that's internalized. But of course, what is not internalized is even the current damage, and even worse, the risk this asset is causing for leading to the complete loss of pollinators. So trying to get at this nexus of valuations, that is kind of the aim of our research. Unfortunately, I can't deliver you any solution, but just looking at another representation of what I've shown you before, again, we have our three types of capital: agricultural capital, pesticides, production, the pollinators. Suppose only these two are traded, the agricultural capital, the pesticide capital, and we have these different flows of risks and production flows. Of course, one thing to consider, and that's where the wealth tax comes in, is you're actually taxing agricultural capital and pesticide capital just to get tax returns. But why don't you tax them at different rates? Trying to actually incorporate these specific kind of distortions to the portfolio, if you wish, across all of these assets they are causing. We can't give you a solution to this. This is kind of what we are aiming to look into. I conclude, lack of internalization of externalities, that's what it always comes down to, may lead to distortions in a sort of a social portfolio, right? So we may have an overvaluation of the sort of pesticide capital, we may have under-evaluation of natural capital due to the excessive risk there is under the production of pesticides. And we have some sort of biased valuation in the agricultural capital. It could go either way, in fact, but again, somehow these values are not right. And the question is whether we can use wealth taxes as one possible lever. Of course, one could use other taxes to correct for the externalities and thereby also actually help to get the portfolio structure right. And one could ideally try to pinpoint rather precise terms of how these taxes should be structured. Final question to get what Willi was saying, and again, I can't provide an answer to this, but of course it's interesting to look into this problem both in a setting where the natural capital is just entirely public and free, as opposed to a situation where some types of natural capital are actually already privately owned. And again, a lot of interesting questions arise. I leave it with this, and thank you. Comments, welcome.
Very good. Thank you very much. So as you see, our simplifications don't work so easily, particularly with you see that it's much more complex. There's bad capital with good one mixed in reality, in nature. And so what to tax now and what to tax rate to use, and what how to identify this with what tax rate one should use. And so you see, but I think it's important to think about those more complex issues. And this was a great contribution in this sense. And now we are going to the next speaker. What I said, Anselmo Kotz is also well known at the New School. He has given lectures there already, and he was at the German Bundesbank. He knows the financial market. He is involved in very high-level negotiation about climate change and climate risk. And he is intending to give a more specific now evaluation what works and what doesn't work in our proposal. Yeah, Hans Helmut, what you want to start?
Thank you very much, Willi. It's a great pleasure, an honor to participate in this meeting. And since you spoke of New School, that has always been a place which I have found incredibly aspiring. Many of my heroes actually have been there. Heroes before you, Willi. So Frankfurt School went to, after being thrown out by the Nazis, created a very dynamic environment at the New School. Franco Modigliani was there. Neisser, an economist from Frankfurt School, was there. So really a great place. But you have invited me to be critical. So I'm somehow supposed to be the party pooper. And I should preface what I say with the following. I really find your and José's idea inspiring and very admirable. And I think one should try to bring it on the road. But in order to make it work, in order to implement, one should expose oneself to critiques which might arise, which might come about. So what I first will do very rapidly, because it has been done by colleagues before, the justification. You nicely refer, by the way, to old Swedish, German public finance by making the case. So you argue wealthy owners of brown assets are responsible for substantially higher shares of public bads. So they create negative externalities which are not accounted in relative prices. So they are distorting the allocation mechanism of markets. In order to deal with that, you propose a corrective tax, as Michael Kuhn has also alluded to just before. Some of those corrective taxes, by the way, are sin taxes. They're not meant to generate revenues. But in this case, it's about generating revenue. And you also suggest to tax returns, not the asset value as such, but the income which arises from those assets. And you have a nice filtering technique in both of your papers, which you explain, where you say that it should be some sort of normal rate of return, which should be the tax base. Such a carbon-based wealth tax, as suggested, is easier to collect. There are less issues about how to value assets, and it's more complicated to do tax avoidance or by underreporting or to go into tax evasion. There are, of course, alternatives, which you also briefly discuss. And economists have somehow a genetic defect, which goes like this. They always have one solution only. And the by far most preferred solution in this domain by the representative economist is carbon pricing, and nothing but. But then you argue that carbon pricing can only have an impact if it hurts, if it's significant, and this comes with substantial increases in prices, and those one could call it green inflation, by the way. Yeah. Such green inflation most probably comes with significant political economic consequences. Willi, you mentioned the problems of Germans with populism. In 2018, there was a movement in France, Gilets jaunes. They were faced with a small increase, if you put on a perspective which was not theirs, small increase in gas prices. But since they were dependent, living in rural areas, on their car to get to their job, that created a significant resistance, and ultimately the proposal was taken off board. So without compensation, carbon pricing is very effective in undermining efforts at decarbonization. What I really also liked about your paper is that you suggest what to do with revenues. And that's in the often mentioned, very informative, very inspiring book by Unur and Willi, Chapter 8 and Chapter 9. You want to use it to fund green industrial policy. And that can be justified, of course, if there's a difference, as also Michael has been referring to, between private and social returns. If they are very significant, and here they really are, externalities. Nicholas Stern spoke of the largest market failure you can imagine. They are really dramatic. And they also arise if there's high uncertainty about capital expenditures. So private capital won't be available for that. And that means massive mispricing of greenhouse gas emissions. So two points of a more critical, from a more critical angle. And I just compliment in a way what Jose was talking about, identification. Their regulators are significantly farther than I see it accounted for in your paper. So the SEC, under the heading of Gary Gensler, who unfortunately will be gone in a month's time, they came up with rather well-defined requirements for disclosure. I won't go through the list, but it means also commitment on the side of management and boards. And it has to be signed off by them. So there's responsibility arising from the SEC standardization of climate-related exposures. The EU has been working on these issues for a longer time. In 2022, the Corporate Social Responsibility Directive was launched. It is phased in this year. It will be fully applied from January 2028 onwards. And what they do is a quite substantial and encompassing definition of what is climate friendly and what is climate increasing risk of climate change. And they force upon oblige companies to take account of what they call double materiality, which means it is about understanding the effects you generate as a company beyond your company borders, and also what are the feedbacks from the external environment on the firm. And this has been the debate about the EU taxonomy, which is about classifying economic activities with an eye on how to achieve net zero transition by 2050. It's very encompassing. It means scope 1, 2, and 3 greenhouse gas emissions. So you should also know, for example, as a credit institution taking out loans, what the complete value chain is. And that goes very much into details. What one also should account for is that central banks are now very deep into that. The ECB has, or the single supervisory mechanism, which is charged with supervising about 115 banks in Europe, meaning 85% of the banking market in Europe, has done meanwhile two very intensive economy-wide climate stress tests, which are taken seriously by bankers because they, if they don't perform, capital requirements will go up. So there's a stake. I should add a couple of buts to that, and I'll add two. I could add more. There is a really massive, I just used the word, confusion about ESG. A very good paper published by Berg et al. From MIT in the Review of Financial Studies has shown, and they have a beautiful title, Aggregate Confusion, that there's a massive disagreement between rating agencies. And they just looked at 6. If you take all the rating agencies available, it gets even much more blurred. So very much mixed signals for investors, incapacity to really evaluate performance. Just recently, there was a paper published by one of the authors, by the way, is from the European Central Bank. They found no evidence as a result of the new rules of lender divestment or evidence of reduced financial emissions. So one really has to, that's an academic duty. And I really very much like what the president of the new schools said. I would phrase it slightly differently. Academics are irresponsible. They don't have to care for profit and loss accounts. They really can go into, they really can ask the proper questions. Does this instrument serve its purpose? And often it does not. And the reason for that is quite often that there's, I call it political economics of standard setting. The EU taxonomy was a dogfight amongst so many institutions and so many interested firms. I would add a Jim Tobin type of argument to that. All this disclosure thing is about the functional efficiency of markets. If markets are not capable of properly assessing, then the financial prices which you get there are just not reflecting the proper price signal. So I'm probably overrunning. I'll finish my last two slides in a minute. Fine?
Yeah.
Okay. So use of the tax. Jose mentioned the fiscal space of Brazil non-existing. So what happens if you disperse money to Sri Lanka? So money is fungible. One has to somehow take care of that it's properly applied. And how do you organize that? Second point, there is a variety of instruments which are currently deployed. In Europe, for example, we have since 2006 a carbon pricing market. Nothing comparable in the US. There are subsidies for green investments. There's lots of standard setting and regulations. I refer to that with regard to banks. The question for me would be, how does this carbon tax fit into this? And finally, if we have a new incoming government in this country here, if some of the big players are not willing to cooperate, how can one try to deal with that by creating Nordhausian clubs of countries who are the willing? What does it mean for the tariff on dirty stuff coming to those regions? I don't want to sound negative. Jose has cited the G20 paper of Sukman. Sukman has a very nice piece in Fiscal Studies last year, and he showed there's now, meanwhile, automatic exchange of bank information between tax authorities, which wasn't available before. Bank secrecy prevented that. So that's a positive one. The other is also mentioned in our debates here. We might get at a minimum tax rate on profits, on corporate profits. So no reason to despair, but Willi, it's up to you, problems to be solved.
Well, thank you very much. At least there's some optimistic and nice odd view at the end. But there is a considerable way to go. This is definitely true. And some of this is considered already, but I don't want to take too much time now here from my side. But I would like to go again around the maybe 2-3 minutes if somebody has now some comments on the other presentations. And there maybe later we can, after this, we can also include some chat comments there. But let's go around here first. I don't know now, I mean, we are all have listened to each other. What you find, so to speak, the positive point and optimistic, what you find more pessimistic on not very well worked out points of things that we have discussed. And maybe we can start. Karim hasn't intervened much, and UNRWA, but in case you want to a more general question, but please short, 1 minute. Yeah, okay, Karim. Oh, you're muted. Muted by the host. That's
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it was really highly constructive debates, and I enjoyed listening to the president of the new school. Definitely, he brings a different perspective, being himself an architect, and even in his profession, he was facing these issues in terms of climate change for years. I was going to ask him a question, I mean, if he's still listening. You know, I wrote an article about the incident that happened in Valencia in Spain, where huge damages happened in terms of inundation. And beside the fact that we are thinking about the carbon tax, the carbon wealth tax, I will have actually 2 questions. The first question, what the engineers and the architect can do to avoid dramatic climate change and their impact on cities. And it was very dramatic. And the losses in Spain, for example, Valencia and Barcelona, they are estimated in billions of dollars. And it creates a social chaos. It was very dangerous, even politically, what happened there. I will send you my article, very similar, that you can dispatch it to the president and other colleagues. The second, I am very much concerned. I was talking before to one of the colleagues, Kuhn, and I was really comparing the carbon wealth tax to the Tobin tax. I remember when James Tobin came to the new school, he was a guest of the new school, basically a resident of the new school on a monthly basis, and he was talking about the Tobin tax. And I remember a question from Edward Neil and even yourself, both of you. In terms of the implementation of such a mechanism, you see, we will have really, I mean, as I said to your colleague, the co-author, I was having a short discussion with her. We need to promote you in the media, Willi Semmler. You have to speak more. They have to listen to you. If I was notified about this webinar, I could have on this panel today my dear friend Antonio Guterres to talk about this subject. It will be very interesting. People in the action. Okay, next time, of course. The book, I think, is an important book. Your colleague Hans has made a very important point. He is looking from the economic policy perspective. This is very important. And I think in today's, to think in terms of the carbon wealth tax, and to explore this innovative concept from the dual purpose of fiscal mechanism aimed at addressing the aim of challenges of climate change and economic inequality. It seeks to tax wealth accrued from carbon-intensive industries and investments. But however, to redirect these funds towards sustainable development and investment will require a lot of work. It is not easy, you know, and you are right now, you are only talking about industrial countries. What about Africa? Yes. You have no idea about the fuel economy carbon in Africa, what's going on there, and how do we handle that? They are contributing also to this. So there's a lot of few practicality that should be handled. Maybe in a different webinar, we can bring more professional, yes, and we can make a sensible contribution. Thank you very much.
Very good suggestion. I don't know if you want to respond, or Joel, get some other question maybe also on your desk.
I mean, leave the floor to somebody else. I would like the president of New School just to address the issue of how the climate change is affecting our cities, and how could we avoid it.
It's very important, but we all were watching this, what was happening there in Spain, and definitely, I mean, the weather extremes and protecting us and the people in the country and the firms with respect to the weather extremes becomes, in the short run, more and more important as compared to mitigation and steering the CO2 emission down. Because this latter one has some long-run effect, but the other short-run effect, we're already seeing it. We're seeing it in the region, and we know exactly in what region we see what weather extremes. But Joel, you want to answer quickly or collect some other questions?
It's up to you, Willi, how you'd like to proceed. I'm happy to answer Kareem's question.
Yeah, maybe short. Yeah, maybe short. Quickly.
The short answer, and it actually ties into some of Michael's question about, in his presentation, about the urban and natural and nature-based solutions, is that increasingly cities have designed out their resilience to significant storm events. So the way in which the cities have tried to manage storm water, groundwater, intense rainfalls, cloudbursts, all of these have been designed out of cities over the course of the last 150 years or so. And so the response to that is to be reintegrating natural and nature-based systems. It actually goes to one of the great valuation points that Michael was talking about. How do you monetize or financialize these? And you do so in part by avoided costs, because the costs that Kareem is talking about now have to be accounted for. But secondly, and I think there's some good examples, Copenhagen is probably the most well advanced version of that, if you look at how they've dealt with cloudburst, to design into cities spaces that can hold the intensity of the rainfall as well as move the water out. And we can't call them extreme anymore, because they're actually, it is the it's just the nature of rain now. So Kareem, I'm happy to share with you the NPCC chapter on flooding, because it speaks to the specifics in New York, but it's exactly the same issues that you were experiencing in Valencia.
Very
Well,
good.
I will be happy to invite you. I will be happy to invite you.
So as the extreme, just a quick remark, a famous new school professor who wrote a book on extreme events, Gumbel. And he said there's no extreme event that cannot be beaten by another extreme event, because
Yes.
we don't have a normal distribution there.
That's right.
So there are maybe more coming. So anyway, Unra, you want to add something, or listen
Please.
first and then add something what you will be answer from our book, or?
Okay.
I would like to thank Professor Iraki for his very interesting analysis in comparison with some other important professors in their academic work. Some of the information he provided, I actually didn't hear about it, but now I know so much. So thank you so much for your detailed and very complete discussion. And thank you for your time for attending this event.
Thank you very much. I want just to add, as I mentioned very quickly to Willi, a long version will be published about your book in December in a different review.
Oh yeah,
It's
so
coming.
there are several places.
That sounds so nice.
And
Yeah.
so
Thank you.
there's one in France already published, a very long one, and another one is coming out in a journal, Journal of Economics and Statistics. So he's on the road there for us, so it's good. Anyway, so who else want to step in and make some remarks, questions, or raise some doubts?
Anyone could
Stefan.
comment on the difficulty of the implementation of the carbon wealth tax versus the Tobin tax?
Oh yeah, so maybe we can do that later. But let's Stefan first. He's also one of the co-authors of Michael from the IASA.
Yeah. So thanks. So I would like to comment. I think it was Jose's talk, and I think it's very much connected to the two questions in the chat. So I think you brought up the topic of the wealth implication, and I think that's very central, because taxes are somehow implying different means to different people, and still in many countries laws are made by rich people to think to somehow implement taxes that can be done on a and can remain on a longer time horizon. Wealth considerations are very much crucial. Otherwise, governments will be replaced somehow.
Okay.
I think that's an important question on the time horizon. Anybody that wants to answer? Maybe you go, or somebody else can pick it up also later. Hans, Helmut, I saw your hand.
I didn't see my hands. So that's
No?
why I was. No. I wanted to interfere. I wanted to make 2 points. The first is about revenue raising and how to use those revenues. In Europe, we had, for example, in response to the COVID crisis, Next Generation EU. That was a program of about 800 billion, some 400 billion of that as grants. But loans as well as grants were conditional. And in Europe, it was pretty difficult. How how would one organize that on a wide scale? So revenue raising and spending.
Yeah.
That's an issue which also falls into the Tobin tax thing. Tobin tax was meant not to raise revenues. It was meant to deal with highly volatile FX markets. And it was meant to give monetary policy autonomy back to nation states, to their monetary authorities. So nothing about revenue raising, completely different beast. This one now is about revenue raising, seemingly, and then you would like to know how and according to which criteria to spend.
That's the question.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of discussion already.
It's talking in terms of green bonds.
Wait, Karim. There is already a discussion going on with Jeffrey Sachs and others that it started with the 100 billion supposed to be raised through the Copenhagen Agreement, how that it should be dispersed by grants or by loans. Now, he suggests basically half-half to developing countries, low-income countries, countries affected. But they are also now by the World Bank and the World Bank arm of the global finance institution of the World Bank arm. There are 2 points. Loans can be also dispersed or allowed for, and the funds that are raised can be used as collaterals. So if something goes wrong, there is a little bit more safety of the, so to speak, investors there. So secondly, there is some huge problem with de-risking problem. So the actually operations in Africa or in other countries are showing a huge risk premium. And the risk premium, so to speak, could be de-risked by those loans. That's another idea. So people have thought about the spending side already. There is some literature on this, but you're correct. It might not be so easy to do. Anyway, so anybody else? Maybe Jose, do you want to respond a little bit to Hans Helmut's questions there? Because you are the most competent person, in particular from the implementation side, so to speak, of our idea there. And so it's these very important, but it's very important critical remarks that we still could work on. But you are the better expert there. So Jose.
No, sure. So first of all, thank you, Professor Kotz, for your comments and critiques. Actually, it's the part that I enjoyed the most, hearing about the flaws that this proposal has, because this actually what makes us move forward, right? In terms of the use of revenues, I think we should start by acknowledging that actually all the types of taxation, in the end of the day, they are national schemes. So there are no, as far as I know, there is no multilateral organism or anything of that sort that can tax, I don't know, anything. In that sense, if the revenues raised by this type of taxation would enter the budgetary process of any country, and I agree with you, the money is not fungible, but budgets
is fungible.
Exactly, money is fungible, but budgets are not. So we can always earmark these resources to some specific destination. As you mentioned, like in the European case, they do this with the carbon pricing. They if I'm not mistaken, they send the money for the innovation fund. There is the modernization fund. And basically, then I think it's a question of industrial policy of you have to have a body that says what is green, what are type of investments that have good prospects or not. And then always there can be errors in this assessment. So I think it's part of this industrial policy agenda, but I don't think it's something that I mean, like we have to think about this, but I wouldn't think it's a major problem in the proposal. On the other hand, what you mentioned about the aggregate confusion, which I agree is a very good name for that, I totally agree. Everything that we said in the paper builds on the fact, on the disclosure requirements. And I agree with you, as of now, the disclosure requirements, they are not precise. There are tons of different procedures on how to calculate emissions, how to put them in a report. So I agree we're not at this stage now, but at least 2 years ago, when we look at the other experiences in the country's experiences, I was more confident because the EU taxonomy was moving in that direction, SEC in the United States as well. Now with the political movements in the United States, I'm not so sure that things will evolve in that direction. Again, if we do not get this correct, it doesn't make any sense to talk about any type of taxation or carbon pricing for that matter. Finally, your comments on multiple regulations, what we do, how do we make this taxation compatible with carbon pricing, with other types of regulation? And President Joe Towers just mentioned one that I've never heard before, a regulation on buildings in New York, but there are tons of regulations anywhere in the world, especially regarding climate and all these functions. And again, I would say that on top of my mind, one one policy to be ended with this carbon wealth tax is carbon pricing, right? We thought about the carbon wealth taxation as a type of carbon price that does not have regressive effects. So if this comes into reality at some point in the future, I think the natural candidate to be brought down is carbon pricing as we know currently. Yeah, and I think these are my main comments. And as a final remark, let me say that I really appreciate these efforts of academia to think about novel ideas and novel proposals, because in the end of the day, even if the proposal doesn't become concrete, it can influence other types of policy. So we mentioned before the minimum tax rate on profits, right? The 15% that Biden's presidency championed 2 years ago. So, for instance, if we, as a result of all these discussions we have on carbon wealth taxation, we could propose, for instance, to raise this 15% to 20% on very specific polluting sectors, for instance, oil producers, right? Or oil producing countries, or anyway, like I think there is a middle ground here where we could at least use the inspirations and the ideas behind the proposal to influentiate policies that are coming to the fore everywhere in the world. So this, I would think, would be my less optimistic remark for this discussion. But again, thank you very much for all the critics.
The sectoral orientation of the carbon tax may be another way to identify the carbon intensity. There are huge data sets now on each sector, 400 sectors for the US. You have the data there, and one can say, well, you're operating in this industry with that carbon intensity, so presumably there's such externality coming out of this. So this is now huge work already done, sectoral orientation instead of the disclosure requirement of the corporations itself. But anyway, Michael, I think we left you out. Do you want to have any final comment? And then Joel, just the last one.
The last comment. Well, I've been pondering. I mean, it's been super interesting and really great to see. Great to hear also Hans Helmut's take and on bits and bobs of your proposal. I mean, one of the things I was wondering about whether you've done that is actually try to come up with some sort of decomposition in the sense of how much. So suppose you have the difference, well, the carbon wealth tax, and compare it against just the wealth tax, which is being used in this way, which has been suggested that actually all of this goes into subsidies, into kind of the greening of industries. And I was just wondering, I mean, it would be, I guess, important to know about how much additional leverage you have through this differentiated tax, rather than just sort of lump a uniform tax on billionaires and use that money. Because obviously we've talked about this a lot. It's very hard to get all the measures and all the rest of it. So you'd want to have it a relatively big impact. I mean, if analytically this can be shown, this would be a nice exercise, I guess. Thank you. Great work anyway. And I agree with what Jose was saying. I mean, regardless of whether that is implemented or not, I mean, just to think about creatively about these different instruments and possibly new instruments, given we see that old ones don't work, I think that's super valuable. So well done.
Yes, that's a good point. And of course, that meets somewhat Hans Helmut's remark that intellectuals can have always great ideas because they don't have an accounting system about the costs and benefits. This was a great remark. Yet it's inspiring.
Willi, just a second. I was ferociously against Basel II. And there was at the time, and I was an official, and I made it public. At the time, there was a critique by academics, Charles Goodhart and others, an academic critique of Basel II. Everybody in the industry went against it. Everybody, including supervisors. 7 years later, the financial system was on the brink. And all the 7 points Charles and others had made in 2000 were confirmed. So that's what I meant with irresponsible. If you are a public figure, you have to speak your role. But as an academic, you just can look at the stuff and be critical.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Joel, you had another last remark?
Yeah, I just was curious on the sectoral approach, because one of the risks, I think, is or one of the questions I would have is, if you take a sectoral approach, would it dampen the likelihood of innovation within the sector? So I think about steel and concrete as good examples of places where you're seeing significant innovation, but it's only in certain individual firms within the sector. And so if you apply a sectoral approach, how do you account for that?
Very good. That's within the sectors, there are these new Schumpeterian innovations coming up with other ideas and other procedures. But then you have multiple of things going on there. Yeah, very important. Yes, we have worked on this. How is phased in the sectors there, which is a little bit more technical change in the sectors there. But the interesting thing, the sectoral approach doesn't have so much the global impact on the voters' behavior, seeing their real wages or real income dropping through some prices coming through greenflation or so. These are sectoral problems then for employment, but the carbon tax has a big impact on everybody. Everybody looks at prices, but only a small percentage of people in the labor market will be affected by sectors. So, but that's an important point. Yes. All right. So I think we should. I get some warning from Desiree now that we should close. People are dropping out already. So I want to, sorry, I don't have any further chat remarks there. And we can basically close. I want to thank Desiree and the SIPA activities. That was a huge work. You know what the details are, so to be considered, so that we get these things running. And at the end, we still had some failures there. But I want to thank everybody here taking place and everybody coming to this event. And we definitely will continue this discussion in future. And also, by the way, the remarks of Hans-Helmut Potz on our proposal will be published to some extent in this journal, German journal, where the technical version of the paper will be published. And so they want to set in motion some discussion, like Hans-Helmut has triggered here, to get it a little bit more reasonable in terms of implementation. Yeah. So thank you very much to everybody for coming and spending the time with us here. Yeah.